decision upset you, Mr. Rockefeller? I hope you'll get your night's sleep. And old John D. ? Why, he crackled right back across the wire. Don't worry, Mr. Johnson, I intend to get a night's sleep. And don't let it bother you either. Good night. That from the man who had once taken to his bed because he had lost $150. Yes, it took a long time for John D. to conquer worry.
He was dying at 53, but he lived to 98.
Reading a book on sex prevented my marriage from going on the rocks by B.R.W. I hate to make this story anonymous, but it is so intimate that I could not possibly use my name. However, Dale Carnegie will vouch for the truth of this story. I first told it to him 12 years ago. After leaving college, I got a job with a large industrial organization, and 5 years later, this company sent me across the Pacific to act as one of its representatives in the Far East. A week before leaving America, I married the sweetest and most lovable woman I have ever known.
But our honeymoon was a tragic disappointment for both of us, especially for her.
By the time we reached Hawaii, she was so disappointed, so heartbroken, that she would have returned to the States, had she not been ashamed to face her old friends and admit failure in what can be and should be life's most thrilling adventure. We lived together 2 miserable years in the Orient. I was so unhappy that I had sometimes thought of suicide. Then one day I chanced upon a book that changed everything. I have always been a lover of books. And one night while visiting some American friends in the Far East, I was glancing over their well-stocked library when I suddenly saw a book entitled Ideal Marriage, by B.R.W. Van der Velde. The title sounded like a preachy, goody-goody document. But, out of idle curiosity, I opened it. I saw that it dealt almost entirely with the sexual side of marriage and dealt with it frankly and without any touch of vulgarity. If anyone had told me that I ought to read a book on sex, I would have been insulted. Read one. I felt I could write one. But my own marriage was such a bust that I condescended to look this book over anyway. So I got up the courage to ask my host if I could borrow it. I can truthfully say that reading that book turned out to be one of the important events of my life. My wife also read it. That book turned a tragic marriage into a happy, blissful companionship. If I had $1 million, I would buy the rights to publish that book and give free copies of it to the countless thousands of bridal couples. I once read that B.R.W. John B. Watson, the distinguished psychologist, said, "Sex is admittedly the most important subject in life. It is admittedly the thing which causes the most shipwrecks in the happiness of men and women."
If B.R.W.
Watson is correct, and I am persuaded that his statement, sweeping as it is almost, if not wholly, true, then why does civilization permit millions of sexual ignoramuses to marry each year and wreck all chances for married happiness? If we want to know what is wrong with marriage, we ought to read a book entitled What is Wrong with Marriage? By B.R.W.
G.
V. Hamilton and Kenneth McGowan. B.R.W. Hamilton spent 4 years investigating what is wrong with marriage before writing that book, and he says, "It would take a very reckless psychiatrist to say that most married friction doesn't find its sources in sexual maladjustment. At any rate, the frictions which arise from other difficulties would be ignored in many, many cases if the sexual relation itself were satisfactory." I know that statement is true. I know from tragic experience. The book that saved my marriage from shipwreck, B.R.W. Van der Velde's Ideal Marriage, can be found in most large public libraries, or bought at any bookshop. If you want to give a little gift to some bride and groom, don't give them a carving set. Give them a copy of Ideal Marriage. That book will do more to increase their happiness than all the carving sets in the world. Opening square bracket. Note by Dale Carnegie. If you find ideal marriage too expensive, here is another book I can recommend. A Marriage Manual, by Drs. Hannah and Abraham Stone. Closing square bracket. I was committing slow suicide because I didn't know how to relax, by Paul Sampson. Direct mail advertising, 12815 Sycamore, Wyandotte, Michigan. Up to 6 months ago, I was rushing through life in high gear. I was always tense, never relaxed. I arrived home from work every night worried and exhausted from nervous fatigue. Why?
Because no one ever said to me,
Paul, you are killing yourself.
Why don't you slow down?
Why don't you relax? I would get up fast in the morning, eat fast, shave fast, dress fast, and drive to work as if I were afraid the steering wheel would fly out the window if I didn't have a death grip on it. I worked fast, hurried home, and at night I even tried to sleep fast. I was in such a state that I went to see a famous nerve specialist in Detroit. He told me to relax. Opening parenthesis. By the way, he gave me the same principles for relaxation that are advocated in chapter 24 of this book. Closing parenthesis. He told me to think of relaxing all the time, to think about it when I was working, driving, eating, and trying to go to sleep. He told me that I was committing slow suicide because I didn't know how to relax. Ever since then I have practiced relaxation. When I go to bed at night, I don't try to go to sleep until I've consciously relaxed my body and my breathing. And now I wake up in the morning rested, a big improvement, because I used to wake up in the morning tired and tense. I relax now when I eat and when I drive.
To be sure, I am alert when driving, but I drive with my mind now instead of my nerves.
The most important place I relax is at my work. Several times a day I stop everything and take inventory of myself to see if I am entirely relaxed. When the phone rings now, no longer do I grab it as though someone were trying to beat me to it. And when someone is talking to me, I'm as relaxed as a sleeping baby. The result? Life is much more pleasant and enjoyable. And I'm completely free of nervous fatigue and nervous worry. A real miracle happened to me, by Mrs. John Berger. 3940 Colorado Avenue, Minneapolis, Minnesota. Worry had completely defeated me. My mind was so confused and troubled that I could see no joy in living. My nerves were so strained that I could neither sleep at night nor relax by day. My 3 young children were widely separated, living with relatives. My husband, having recently returned from the armed service, was in another city trying to establish a law practice. I felt all the insecurities and uncertainties of the post-war readjustment period. I was threatening my husband's career, my children's natural endowment of a happy, normal home life, and I was also threatening my own life. My husband could find no housing, and the only solution was to build. Everything depended on my getting well. The more I realized this and the harder I would try, the greater would be my fear of failure. Then I developed a fear of planning for any responsibility. I felt that I could no longer trust myself. I felt I was a complete failure. When all was darkest and there seemed to be no help, my mother did something for me that I shall never forget or cease being grateful for. She shocked me into fighting back. She upbraided me for giving in and for losing control of my nerves and my mind. She challenged me to get up out of bed and fight for all I had. She said I was giving in to the situation, fearing it instead of facing it, running away from life instead of living it. So I did start fighting from that day on. That very weekend I told my parents they could go home, because I was going to take over. And I did what seemed impossible at the time. I was left alone to care for my 2 younger children. I slept well, I began to eat better, and my spirits began to improve. A week later, when they returned to visit me again, they found me singing at my ironing. I had a sense of well-being because I had begun to fight a battle and I was winning. I shall never forget this lesson. If a situation seems insurmountable, face it. Start fighting. Don't give in. From that time on, I forced myself to work, and lost myself in my work. Finally, I gathered my children together and joined my husband in our new home. I resolved that I would become well enough to give my lovely family a strong, happy mother. I became engrossed with plans for our home, plans for my children, plans for my husband, plans for everything except for me. I became too busy to think of myself. And it was then that the real miracle happened. I grew stronger and stronger and could wake up with the joy of well-being, the joy of planning for the new day ahead, the joy of living. And although days of depression did creep in occasionally after that, especially when I was tired, I would tell myself not to think or try to reason with myself on those days, and gradually they became fewer and fewer and finally disappeared. Now, a year later, I have a very happy, successful husband, a beautiful home that I can work in 16 hours a day, and 3 healthy, happy children, and for myself, peace of mind. Setbacks. By Ferenc Molnar. Noted Hungarian playwright. Work is the best narcotic. Exactly 50 years ago, my father gave me the words I have lived by ever since. He was a physician. I had just started to study law at the Budapest University. I failed one examination. I thought I could not survive the shame, so I sought escape in the consolation of failure's closest friend, alcohol, always at hand.
Apricot brandy, to be exact.
My father called on me unexpectedly. Like a good doctor, he discovered both the trouble and the bottle in a second. I confessed why I had to escape reality. The dear old man then and there improvised a prescription. He explained to me that there can be no real escape in alcohol or sleeping pills or in any drug. For any sorrow there is only one medicine, better and more reliable than all the drugs in the world.
Work.
How right my father was. Getting used to work might be hard. Sooner or later you succeed. It has, of course, the quality of all the narcotics. It becomes habit-forming. And once the habit is formed, sooner or later, it becomes impossible to break one's self of it. I have never been able to break myself of the habit for 50 years.
Dash.
Opening square bracket. Reprinted with permission of the author, from Words to Live by, a little treasury of inspiration and wisdom, published by Simon & Schuster, Inc. Copyright, 1947, by William Nichols. Dash. I was so worried I didn't eat a bite of solid food for 18 days. By Catherine Holcomb, Farmer Sheriff's Office, Mobile, Alabama. 3 months ago, I was so worried that I didn't sleep for 4 days and nights. And I did not eat a bite of solid food for 18 days. Even the smell of food made me violently sick. I cannot find words to describe the mental anguish I endured. I wonder whether hell has any worse tortures than what I went through. I felt as if I would go insane or die.
I knew that I couldn't possibly continue living as I was.
The turning point of my life was the day I was given an advance copy of this book. During the last 3 months, I have practically lived with this book, studying every page, desperately trying to find a new way of life.
The change that has occurred in my mental outlook and emotional stability is almost unbelievable.
I am now able to endure the battles of each passing day. I now realize that in the past, I was being driven half mad not by today's problems but by the bitterness and anxiety over something that had happened yesterday or that I feared might happen tomorrow. But now, when I find myself starting to worry about anything, I immediately stop and start to apply some of the principles I learned from studying this book. If I am tempted to tense up over something that must be done today, I get busy and do it immediately and get it off my mind. When I am faced with the kind of problems that used to drive me half crazy, I now calmly set about trying to apply the 3 steps outlined in Chapter 2, Part 1. First, I ask myself what is the worst that can possibly happen. Second, I try to accept it mentally. Third, I concentrate on the problem and see how I can improve the worst, which I am already willing to accept if I have to. When I find myself worrying about a thing I cannot change and do not want to accept, I stop myself short and repeat this little prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. Since reading this book, I am really experiencing a new and glorious way of life. I am no longer destroying my health and happiness by anxiety. I can sleep 9 hours a night now. I enjoy my food. A veil has been lifted from me. A door has been opened. I can now see and enjoy the beauty of the world which surrounds me. I thank God for life now and for the privilege of living in such a wonderful world. May I suggest that you also read this book over. Keep it by your bed. Underscore the parts that apply to your problems. Study it, use it. For this is not a reading book in the ordinary sense, it is written as a guidebook to a new way of life. End.